Dear friends, welcome to another episode of Military Ops. In this video, we will discuss Vladimir Putin's recent statement expressing his desire to negotiate an end to the invasion of Ukraine and why time is no longer on Russia's side. Before diving into Russia's economic and social issues and understanding why time has turned against Putin, it's important to highlight a recent piece of news that could redefine the global geopolitical landscape. On the very same day Donald Trump assumed the presidency of the United States, Vladimir Putin declared his intention to negotiate an end to the conflict he initiated in Ukraine. In a meeting with his top advisors, Putin stated that Moscow is open to dialogue with the new U.S. administration as long as the so-called root causes of the conflict are addressed. This statement raised many questions and interpretations, the main one being what Putin considers these root causes to be. For many analysts, this effort is seen as an attempt to consolidate territorial gains and legitimize Russia's military actions in Ukraine. However, others view this proposal as a strategy to buy time, weaken Ukrainian resistance, and test the resolve of Western allies. Trump's arrival to power adds an extra layer of complexity. Known for his controversial opinions about Russia and his relationship with Putin, many wonder whether Trump will adopt a conciliatory policy toward the Russian leader. According to Elina Valtonen, Finland's foreign minister, a country that joined NATO in 2023 as a direct consequence of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the current Russian government faces extreme internal pressure. The war in Ukraine has placed an unsustainable burden on Russia's economy and society. Since 2021, inflation has risen drastically, with consumer prices increasing by more than 30%. This is a direct result of higher import costs, exacerbated by international sanctions and a shortage of skilled labor. The demographic crisis is another alarming factor, with Russia facing a combination of low birth rates, high mortality, and an exodus of skilled workers. Young talents unwilling to go to war and opponents of Vladimir Putin's regime are leaving the country, further undermining long-term economic growth potential. To counter capital flight and the ruble's devaluation, Russia's central bank raised interest rates to 21%. While this measure stabilized the currency, it also led to a rise in corporate bankruptcies and reduced access to credit. The result is a weakened business sector, with much of the country's enterprises focusing solely on war-related industries. According to data provided by Putin, the Russian economy grew by 3.5% in 2024. But this figure, if accurate, needs to be contextualized. Nearly all of this growth came from sectors tied to the war effort, such as arms production and military logistics, with the government prioritizing massive investments in these areas while neglecting essential sectors like healthcare, education, and civilian infrastructure. Putin's reports on Russia's budget reveal that around 40% of all government spending is directly allocated to the war. This unbalanced allocation of resources demonstrates an economic strategy exclusively geared toward sustaining the conflict in Ukraine, leaving very little for investments in essential civilian sectors crucial to the population's well-being. One of the strategies discussed by Elina Valtonen to weaken Russia is the intensification of economic sanctions. Despite Russia's insistence that sanctions are not causing problems for its economy, Finland's foreign minister suggests measures such as lowering the price cap on Russian oil and implementing stricter enforcement against the Ghost Fleet, a clandestine network of tankers Moscow uses to export oil and circumvent international sanctions. These actions would not only increase Russia's operational costs, but could also diminish its ability to generate revenue to fund the war effort. Additionally, it's important to highlight how the war economy directly impacts Russian society, with the cost of living soaring while essential public services have been severely reduced or even eliminated. This dynamic has created a dual economy. While military sectors thrive, ordinary citizens face severe hardships, reflecting the Kremlin's priorities that place sustaining the conflict above addressing the population's basic needs. With this context in mind, we return to Vladimir Putin's statements made on the day of Donald Trump's inauguration as President of the United States. Putin declared that Moscow is open to negotiations with the new administration, provided that the root causes of the conflict are addressed. According to some analysts, this statement can be interpreted as a strategic maneuver by Putin to buy time and weaken Ukraine's position. The reality is that the Kremlin remains steadfast in its goal of forcing Ukraine into total capitulation, with Putin's mention of root causes effectively serving as a way to justify his strategic demands. These include the recognition of the annexation of Crimea and the Ukrainian regions of Donbass, Zaporizhia, and Kherson, as well as ensuring Ukraine's neutrality. As I mentioned earlier, Donald Trump's stance in this context adds an extra layer of complexity. During his previous term, Trump demonstrated a controversial approach toward Russia, characterized by public statements that often appeared to downplay Moscow's actions. Additionally, he openly questioned the role of institutions like NATO, raising doubts about the United States' commitment to the alliance. If Trump chooses a more conciliatory policy toward Russia, it could weaken Ukraine's position and create divisions among Western allies. On the other hand, if he adopts a tougher stance, it could increase pressure on Moscow and strengthen Ukrainian resistance. In either scenario, negotiations between Putin and Trump will have profound implications, not just for Ukraine's future, but also for the balance of power in Europe and the rest of the world. Putin's expressed desire to negotiate with Trump is, in the view of many, a direct result of these two factors. First, Putin is aware that the extreme militarization of Russia's economy will increasingly negatively impact the population, potentially paving the way for the strengthening of internal dissident groups. Second, Putin knows that with Trump, he might at least achieve some of his objectives in Ukraine. The question now is, what position will Trump take at the negotiation table? Do you think he will benefit Russia, or will he side with Ukraine? Share your opinion in the comments, and if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, make sure to do so now and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any updates.
Предвыборный период был для господина Трампа во всех отношениях нелегким. На него и даже на членов его семьи постоянно оказывалось жесточайшее давление. Дело дошло до попыток покушения на его жизнь. Но он проявил мужество, одержал убедительную победу на выборах. И мы видим заявление вновь избранного президента США и членов его команды о желании восстановить прямые контакты с Россией, прерванные не по нашей вине уходящей администрации. Слышим также его заявление о необходимости сделать все, чтобы не допустить Третьей мировой войны. Безусловно, мы приветствуем такой настрой и поздравляем избранного президента Соединенных Штатов Америки со вступлением в должность. Мы никогда не отказывались от диалога, всегда были готовы поддерживать ровные отношения сотрудничества с любой американской администрацией. Я говорил уже об этом неоднократно. Исходим из того, что диалог будет строиться на равноправной и взаимоуважительной основе, учитывая ту значимую роль, которую играют наши страны по ряду ключевых вопросов повестки дня в мире, включая и укрепление стратегической стабильности и безопасности. Мы также открыты для диалога с новой администрацией США по украинскому конфликту. Самое важное здесь – устранить первопричины кризиса, о которых мы много раз говорили.
You've called for a ceasefire in Ukraine. If Vladimir Putin doesn't come to the table to negotiate with you, will you put additional sanctions on Russia?
Sounds likely.
And
Yeah.
do you think that the war should be frozen currently along
The
the
war
River
should have never
Babylon?
started. If you had a competent president, which you didn't, the war wouldn't have happened. The war in Ukraine would have never happened if I were president.
Are you going to keep sending weapons to Ukraine, or are you going to turn off the tap soon?
Well, we're looking at that. We're talking to Zelensky. We're going to be talking with President Putin very soon. And we'll see how it all happens. We're going to look at it very soon. One thing I do feel, the European Union should be paying a lot more than they're paying, because under Biden, I mean, we're in there for $200 billion more. Now, it affects them more than it affects us. We have an ocean in between, right? Little thing called an ocean. The European Union should equalize. We're in there for $200 billion more than the European Union. I mean, what are we, stupid? I guess the answer is yes, because they must think so.